Am I on? You don't know? Oh, he don't know. Good Lord. Good morning, Irresistible. Hi. You guys have no idea what's going on, do you? I want to thank you guys for watching online. I really appreciate you guys being here, most of all in person. For those of you online that aren't familiar, I am Les Farley. My wife Grace and I are the founding and senior pastors of this place, at least for this week. And the scriptures, at least till the next board meeting, the scriptures that I'm going to talk about and a lot of the study notes that I have that I think would help you out in your additional study are going to be on the screen behind me. You feel free to take pictures of the screen if you have to or want to. Do turn off the sound on your phone, though, please. Those of you online, you can find all the same notes. All the same scriptures are going to be on the Bible app. It should be live, should have gone live at 9 o'clock this morning. Easiest way to get there is just navigate over to our Irresistible Facebook page. The link went active this morning just about 8 o'clock. That will take you directly to that. And I have a lot to cover today. Again, there's a lot in the Christmas story. My goodness. This is episode 2 of the Christmas series that I have named The Greatest Story Never Told. Title may not be exactly true. I mean, it's been told, and there are a lot of good churches out there that tell you the truth about Christmas. It is not about a fat little elf jumping down the chimney. It is all about God coming in the midst of our mess and doing things that need to be done for us. So, as far as the general population goes, I think, a lot of people, when you talk to them, they have no real working knowledge of Jesus. Christmas to them is just Santa Claus. And we never taught our kids that there was a Santa Claus, but we did watch a lot of the Santa movies. And we just told them that's just people dressing up in an outfit. Just like, there's not 10,000 of you and one in every store taking kids' orders for what they want to have for Christmas. There is just the Christ. There is just our Savior, and that's what we celebrate. Now, movies, TV shows, we watched a couple of the different movies yesterday that were really kind of cute. The Santas were freaky looking. I never seen Santas that ugly and mean looking as what they were in these movies. But the biggest thing that you look at, when I look at movies, I love to look at the end credits. Because at the end credits, you get to see where do they find these places that look like this? I mean, there's supposed to be other planets, but they're right here on planet Earth. And in today's world, they may not even be on planet Earth because they've got all the computers they're working with and all the CGI effects and stuff that way. But you always will find a listing for where they were at and all the people that were in charge of the production at that particular place. And, it used to be, back when I was a kid, all of the TV shows, if you go back, you get a chance and you haven't and you're really not interested in it, it's still worth looking at. Look at a show like the original Star Trek. All of that was filmed in a studio. And when you see that every planet they went to looked exactly the same, you realize they just painted that rock a different color, and it's supposed to be a different place. It's not like that anymore. They go all kinds of places. I was in Cleveland one time several years ago, and they were filming Spider-Man in Cleveland. Now, Spider-Man, if you know anything about Spider-Man, lives in New York. And evidently, Cleveland looks a lot like New York. Did in the movie anyway. But it was kind of fun to see that, when you go into this on-location stuff, you get a better idea, I think, of the extent that the production people will go to give you the idea that you're in a completely different place right now. So this week's message, I thought it would be kind of neat. We looked at the cast last week, and this week I thought it would be kind of fun to look at the stage. Let's look at the locations that are involved in the Christmas story. And most of us are kind of aware of that, right? I mean, it's in songs, and it's, we see it on TV a lot. But I'm going to focus on the two primary places that the Christmas story took place. Now, Luke, the book of Luke, or the Gospel of Luke, starts out in Jerusalem, of all places, which isn't part of the Christmas story, but evidently it must be part of the Christmas story because it's in there. But it starts out in Jerusalem in the temple, and Mary's cousin's husband is giving an angel a hard time. If you ever have an opportunity to talk to an angel face to face, do not give them a hard time. Because Zacharias found out what happens when you tell the angel you don't believe him. And you'll have to get into the backstory on that part of it, but he didn't talk for a long time. It didn't start out well with Zacharias, but it ended well with him, and that's the important part. In spite of Zacharias' doubt, Mary's cousin Elizabeth did get pregnant and did deliver John the Baptist, the person we know of as John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin. So, I'm not going to go through all of that any more than I just did. Let's look at Luke chapter 1, and we'll drop down to verse 26. And it says, in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a village in Galilee. See, God knew exactly where that was. He knew exactly where she was. A little village in a little out-of-the-way backwater, well, it wasn't any water, back desert town to Mary. Verse 27, to a virgin named Mary. So God knew where she was. He knew she was in Nazareth. Now, we've already covered who Mary is and what her importance in the story, and we'll get back to her in a week or two. Today, we're going to look at that location. The village of Nazareth. Have you ever looked that up on, your Bible? If you have an actual Bible, it has a series of maps, usually in the back, to tell you all the different places and all the different eras of the Bible and how the towns changed and, the different places and things that people did. Or the biggest thing that I can tell you, and I did a lot of this out of the different things that I have in my Bible, the different study books, Nazareth at the time. The archaeological studies of Nazareth, it's a town there now, but the archaeological digs that they've done around that show that that was a small agricultural town of about 120 to 150 people. So the entire town of Nazareth, with room, would fit in this building. Most of them would fit right in this room. And that's all there was. Now, some people said it was a lot bigger than that, but Indiana Jones didn't verify that. So it was a small town, a very small place. And it was built on some hills that were on a high desert in between two mountain ranges. So again, we talked about, some of the things that went on with Mary and Joseph. This was not a lush tropical place. This was a place of rocks and sand and a whole lot of wind coming up through that. One of the things that one of the theologians I was reading, he said that Nazareth was so far off the beaten path that there was absolutely no reason to go there unless you just had to. Now that, we all know towns like that around here. Why would you go there? Why would you do that? Nazareth was nothing. It was just a dinky little town. And when John wrote his gospel, and he's talking about Jesus in all of his, he gave this account of what Nazareth was thought about. John chapter 1, verse 45, Philip went to look for Nathanael and told him, "We have found the very person Moses and the prophets wrote about. His name is Jesus, the son of Joseph from Nazareth." Pretty innocent, but then look what Nathanael says. Verse 46, "Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth?" So this was not a big hub of society. This was just a small town. Didn't have a lot going on. But I want you to see the importance of why Jesus had to grow up there. The things that he would learn in a small town that he couldn't learn in a metropolis anywhere. And God took all of this prophetic stuff that had been filtering down through the ages from all the different prophets in the Hebrew nation and brought all of that into play when Jesus came from Nazareth. Then now, in Hebrew, the name Nazareth comes from the word netzer, and it means a shoot or a branch. So where do you live? I live on a shoot. I live in a branch. I'm not a squirrel, but I live in a branch. One messianic prophecy from Isaiah 11:1 was kind of interesting. In Message translation puts it this way: "A green shoot will sprout from Jesse's stump, and from his roots a budding branch." And I like the fact that this paraphrase capitalized the branch and the shoot, because that's exactly, Jesus was a shoot off of David's line. He was a branch off of that lineage, and we discovered that last week. Both Mary and Joseph were part of David's line. And when you look at that and you go through it, you find out that word shoot and branch in that verse way back in Isaiah, both were the word Netzer. Both were the word that meant Nazareth when people would hear it. Now, the big question that I saw online, there were a lot of people that are, this time of year, there's all kinds of people that complain and ask questions that they really don't want to know the answers to, and they just kind of stir in the pot, my grandma used to say. But there is a historical record. Now, this is not biblical. This is a Christian historical record that Rick Renner found, and he talked about it in his book, and he said that in the year 100 BC, there was actually one entire clan from David's lineage that moved to Nazareth. And they moved there to be stonemasons. If you remember what we talked about Joseph last week, these people went there specifically to be workers for another city that was being built 3 or 4 miles away. So a city being built back in those days, you're talking about 100 BC all the way up to when Jesus was born. So 100 years they're still building this city. But that's what most of the people in Nazareth were doing. They were the stonemasons. They were the ones that were in charge of all of that. God took all of this throughout all of time, and everything lines up. Everything that he had his Old Testament prophets talk about came true in the birth and the life of Jesus Christ. And to me, that is mind-boggling. If you know anything about just planning vacation today, it's impossible almost to get all of that done the way that you want it to happen. And here's God just moving all these pieces around and getting things to be exactly where they needed to be, so that this town Nazareth, where Jesus grew up, is actually where, and I'll get into that hopefully in a week or two, but it's actually where the Magi, you remember the guys from the east? Nazareth is where they went to see Jesus. They were fairly late to the party for the birth, so 2 years later they ended up in Nazareth. And they went there, and that is in the Bible. So Mary and Joseph raised Jesus in Nazareth. He was a small town boy. He was inconspicuous as all get out, to the point that nobody thought anything would happen out of Nazareth. But the Son of God was there, and some things began to happen. So we'll get into the rest of that here in maybe next week. Let's go to the city that we all associate with Christmas, Bethlehem, the city of David. City of David, another small village, wasn't big. It was about 70 miles from Nazareth, due north. But it was 90 miles if you went by the road. If you were a crow and you could fly straight, it's 70 miles, but it was 90 miles to take all through the mountain passes and get out of Nazareth, up the mountains and across them, and back up into another big plain and desert. Either one. Now let me ask you, who's ready to take a 70-mile walk? Just because Governor DeWine said, I need you to come to Columbus and pay your taxes. I'd love to, Governor, but I'm 90 miles away. You're still going to come and pay your taxes. 90 miles. Think about that as a 9-month pregnant woman. And I love the little pictures where you see her, just her and Joseph with nothing else. But let me tell you something, that's not how they traveled back then. You know how we travel on vacation? We travel differently now than we did with our children, but our vacations with our children were almost exactly the same. We just didn't get to take any of our stuff. We took all of their stuff. And we've teased each other for years that we'll never be able to fly somewhere for vacation because we have to take too many things. We load my truck from one end to the other, or her car. She had one car, we had to trade it in. It wasn't big enough to go on vacation in. We had stuff. And that's how it was back then. They had to have tents. You're talking about a 70 to 90 mile trip would be about 4.5 days. Typically, a caravan would travel 20 miles a day. but not with a 9-month pregnant woman. Because every 5 miles, I got to pee. I'm not saying that to be mean. That's how it is. Guys, you have no idea. You have no idea. You talk about a hard trip. It was hard for Mary. It was hard for Joseph. I mean, Mary was riding his ass all the way. It's a donkey. It's a valid word. It's in the Bible. Settle down, settle down. All right. There is nothing in the Bible. I'm going to be in so much trouble. There's nothing in the Bible that says she rode a donkey. There's nothing that says she didn't. But historically, that was the most common way for a man to have his wife go on a long trip like that, and especially if she's pregnant. But I got to tell you, if you've ever been on any of these, like in zoos and stuff where you get on a camel and you ride, or you get on a donkey and ride, that is not comfortable. And if you can imagine that, those of you that have children, if you can imagine trying that a couple of weeks before you gave birth, or a week before you gave birth, I don't think I'd like to do it, let alone have someone pregnant doing all that. So the likelihood of Mary walking that far pregnant, pretty slim. Did she ride a donkey? Did she ride a camel? Chances are it may have been a donkey, because Joseph, as a businessman, would have had plenty of those available to not only have her ride, but to carry the tents, the cooking utensils, the food, everything that they needed for, I almost said vacation, everything they needed for that trip had to go along with them. There weren't any rest areas back then. You stop and think about it. When Mary looked at Joseph and gave him that look and said, I got to go. Modesty says she didn't just go walking off behind a dune. Joseph had to unload the tent, set up the tent, make sure she had some privacy. Well, now she's going to be hungry, so I might as well set up the cooking tent. We'll get that done. We'll bring all the food out, and we'll make a meal. And I'm sure he had some servants that helped along with that. And then probably after she had something to eat, she had to take a nap, and then they have had to pack it all back up and go as far as they could before nighttime and do it all again. You're not talking about a 4-day trip now. You're talking about the possibility of this being a couple of weeks and possibly more. We don't know. We're not told that. All of that just because some emperor way off in the far, far away land of Columbus, wherever it was, Rome, said, I need everybody to go to their own towns where their families originally came from so that we can get an accurate count so I know how many taxes to charge you. That's what it was all about. It was all about money. And if you look at Luke chapter 2, it talks about that. All returned to their own ancestral towns to register for this census. Now, when you see the screensavers and you see the different, movies and things that way, you would get the impression that Mary and Joseph are on that road by themselves with no supplies, no place to sleep at night, and they're going to make this entire trip by themselves. But this verse here, Luke chapter 2, verse 3, says all returned. Not everybody in Ohio, everybody in the empire. Everybody in every stretch of the world that was known as the Roman Empire were on the road to go back to wherever they originally came from. And you know the story that verse 4 says, because Joseph was a descendant of King David, he had to go to Bethlehem. And he took Mary with him, who was now, I love this wording, who now was obviously pregnant. So, not just two people on the road. Everybody in the empire is on the road to somewhere. They may not even be from Israel. They may be traveling to other countries because that's where they originally came from. Can you imagine the audacity of a ruler who would think that that's a good idea? The whole nation, the whole empire, wherever. What do you got to do do you close your house up when you go on vacation? Lock the doors. If you have an alarm system, you turn it on. I turn the water heater off. I turn the furnace off. I turn everything down. I've come home way too many times with things in the floor that shouldn't be there. Pack everything you own and join a caravan to wherever it is you have to go. Can you even, businesses had to shut down. A lot of these people had their own shops, they couldn't garden, they couldn't farm, they couldn't do anything. Everything had to shut down. Schools shut down, businesses shut down. Don't think they got paid for that. They weren't any different then than we are today. You don't work, typically you don't get paid, right? Some of you might be lucky enough that happens. All work brought to a screeching halt, all because the emperor wanted to know how many people he had in his empire. And how long did this take? How long was the journey? How did they know when to stop counting? Can you see the poor guy that stopped counting and brought the numbers to the emperor, and then 100,000 people show up at the gate and says, "We're here. It's us." 700 years ago, 700 years before this, the Holy Spirit put this in play. When he said through the prophet Micah, "But you, O Bethlehem, are only a small village among all the people of Judah. Yet a ruler of Israel will come from you, one whose origins are from the distant past." Do you think Joseph and Mary would have thought it was a good idea to take a 90-mile trip across the mountains on a donkey a week before she gave birth? Ladies, would you have a discussion with your husband if that happened? Just because they thought it's like a good idea doesn't mean that it is for you. So let's get back to the road. Let me get into some of this. And I know this is weird, but this is the stuff I geek out on. So some of this all comes into play next week and the week after. Nothing on this trip was easy. There was nothing about travel in those days. Travel today's not easy. It seemed like every time we go on vacation, there's a road closed, there's an accident, you're sitting there for an hour waiting for all the gawkers to get out of the way. We try to pray for the people that were in the accident, but usually we're there way after the accident happened, and it's just the people that are slowing down so that they can see what happened. People on the road drive like they do around here. Not well. And it's just, sometimes it's frustrating. But can you imagine at the speed of a donkey bouncing your pregnant wife up and down the mountainside, and you got to cover 20 miles today in order to get there on time? I don't think I would have ever broached that idea at any point when Pastor Grace was pregnant, because I like my life. I like living. One last thing before we go. This is really faster than I thought it would be, but I just want to give you some food for thought. Bethlehem. Now we know it's called the city of David, but the name Bethlehem actually means house of bread. So when they went, they were going to the house of bread. And as I read that, I just kind of focused on that for a while, and the Holy Spirit began to talk to me about how many times in the different Gospels did Jesus refer to himself as the bread of life. So here's the bread of life, parents going to the house of bread to have the bread of life. And again, it's kind of, God had this so detailed and so planned. After Jesus' death and resurrection, the historians couldn't find anything wrong with any part of his life. Every bit of his life lined up with Scripture and prophecy. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but I remember that there was a few years ago, there was the thought that a man could fulfill 4 or 5 of these prophecies was astronomical. But the one man fulfilling all the prophecies was 1 in 1 with 250 zeros behind it. Now, when I was younger, I put that all on the screen so you could see how ridiculous it looked. But I looked at that computer this week and I thought, yeah, I'm just going to tell you, you can go home and write it all out. Take a look at it. You can't make this stuff up. When you look at how this story all unfolds, you look at where they're from, where they went, why they went. Why did the timing come that particular time? And why couldn't they wait just another week? Because when tax day comes, tax day comes. And I'm amazed, I guess, at the amount of human inconvenience that God is willing to put people through so that his word stands true. You got an entire empire on the move just so Jesus will be in Bethlehem the night of the birth. It boggles my mind. And nobody knows. Nobody knew why except Joseph and Mary. They knew who Jesus was. They knew who he was prophesied to be. And I find it interesting that in all of that going on and thinking about how the process had to go, there's no historical account and there's nothing biblically that tells us that either one of them ever complained about it. They knew why they were going. They knew Jesus was the Christ, the Messiah. They knew it was time for him to be born. Whether they knew it had to be Bethlehem or not, and maybe they did, because if you remember, Mary spent a lot of time helping her parents with all the work that they did and throughout the temple and all the study that she had done as a young girl. So if you're following, I guess my suggestion would be, how far are you willing to let the Lord inconvenience your life to do the things that you know you want done? Are you willing to, let me put it to you this way, this thought came to them. How many of you ever prayed the Lord's Prayer? You know the Lord's Prayer? Yeah? I see the two nodding. So, after you prayed the Lord's Prayer, have you ever complained about what's happening in your life?
Yeah, once in a while.
But when you say, your will be done, Lord, on earth, in earth and as it is in heaven, what do you have to complain about? Because that's got to be his will, yes?
That's right.
I'm going to have to get out of here. I'll make sure that side door's unlocked. Those of you that are watching online, I know this is kind of just delivering this, it seemed a little boring, but it's important to know these pieces as we get into the last two parts of this series, because everything about the life of Joseph and Mary and everything about where, all of that came into play in the ministry of Jesus Christ. And it's important that we know that and recognize it. So, you guys online, I guess more so, and it's the same for you guys here, but you guys online, everybody has to come to a point where they recognize that God really knows what he's doing. And maybe I should find out more about this Jesus guy. Because if I knew about Jesus, I possibly wouldn't complain about so many things. Maybe I just release it to God. Like Peter. Peter said, cast your cares on the Lord. Cast your cares to him. You should have no care. I mean, you should care, but it shouldn't cause you to worry and concern. Because you've turned yourself over to God. If you're saved, you've turned yourself to him. If you're not saved, you've got an opportunity to make that same decision at any given moment. And I would suggest that you don't make a no decision until you hear the last two messages of this series. Next week, episode 3 is Scene 1, No Room at the Inn. And with that, I will step aside and let you hear from the best-looking half of us. I tried to match your red shirt, but I didn't have a red shirt. I got a reddish shirt.
I think it looks great. Hey, you online, thank you for joining us. Again, if you have any prayer requests, please get a hold of us, and we'd be happy to pray for you. Your needs matter to us. Thank you for joining us.